When I was 18, I walked out of a warehouse job with a duffel bag and a bus ticket, thinking the road would be my way out. No more boss breathing down my neck, no more dead-end Saturdays. I didn't know then that freedom comes with its own price. 100,000 miles of empty shoulders, motel coffee, and the kind of nights where you start to hear the country as something that remembers you. After 40 years behind the wheel, you collect stories. Some are funny, some are boring. And then there are the ones that sit in your ribcage and keep you awake no matter how tight you lock the sleeper door. I've got 5 of those stories. 5 nights that still feel wrong when I close my eyes. They're not folklore dressed up as headlines. They're the kind of things you live through, the kind of stuff you can't unsee. I'll tell them like I remember them. No flourishes, no bragging. Just the road, and what walked out of the dark shoulder into my life. First one starts on I-80, out past Lincoln, Nebraska. It was a night like a sealed envelope. Cold, clear, no moon, the highway a ribbon of white lines and distant truck lights. I was running an empty leg, deadhead back to Omaha, so I was lighter than usual, Peterbilt humming under me, sleeper heater ticking like a cheap clock. My logbook said I had a few hours before I had to stop for 10. The CB was dead. Radio static, then nothing. Being alone at that hour makes any sound feel too loud. The click of the thermostat, the squeak of the seat, the slow whisper of diesel. I saw her before I saw anything else, a pale shape under a roadside sign, half lit by my high beams. At first I thought it was a coat hung on a post. Then she stepped into the gravel like she belonged there. White sundress, dirty edges, hair a mess, bare feet. At 2 in the morning, westbound on I-80, nobody wears a sundress. Not in November. Instinct told me to keep going. Manners told me something else. You'd be surprised how often that split-second decision, stop or keep rolling, feels like a judgment call on your entire life. I pulled over, engine down to an idle, cab light on, so she could see I wasn't a threat. Truckers pick people up sometimes. We're a strange breed. Road raised, soft where we used to be hard. I've given water, a smoke, a ride to a kid running from a busted relationship. You don't always know what you're getting, nobody does. But you weigh it in your head, lone woman, no phone signal, bad weather coming. I opened the passenger door. She climbed in like she had always expected to be there and shut it like it was her place. No thank you, no where you headed. Just sat, eyes on the dash, humming to herself. She smelled like a bus station, and something else I couldn't name. She introduced herself as Riley. That's all she offered. I told her I was headed west to a drop-off in Omaha. Nothing special. She nodded, smirked, looked at me like she was reading the lines on my face. At first it was small talk. Truck stop coffee, the weather, the old woman at mile marker 122 that still sells cinnamon rolls out of a camper. But her laughs came too quick. Her eyes would flash to the rear view with a kind of quickness that didn't fit her quiet hands. Conversation turned on little knives. She'd say something, mean, a joke that landed wrong, and then grin when I tightened my jaw. Once she asked if I had kids. I said I did. A daughter who's now in her 20s, living in Kansas City. She tilted her head and said, "You sure about that?" Like it was a secret she could poke at. You learn after enough years to read people by a handful of telltale things. Where their hands rest, how long they look at you before answering, whether they notice the chain on your tractor's 5th wheel. Riley had that twitch you see in dogs with sharp teeth, always listening for a door to open. It put me on edge, but I was already a soft place for the broken. I'd been a kid once who needed a ride. Maybe that's why I didn't turn her away. The first real change happened near the rest area at Gothenburg. Headlights bounced off the wet pavement. A light mist began. She went quiet for a long time. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a Tupperware container. The kind you see under a blinking deli case. Cheap plastic, lid still fogged from whatever was inside. "You hungry?" she asked. It sounded casual, like she was offering me a sandwich. I hadn't expected a handheld bomb. When I lifted the lid, the smell hit me so hard my stomach turned. I won't describe it. There are some smells that are private, like church or war. It made my guts get small. She watched me, held my eyes. Then she laughed, low and quick, and said, "Used to be you could get anything in Denver." She said words about Denver, about a man. She told a story with the kind of detail that either meant she was sick enough to be telling the truth, or brilliant enough to sell a lie. He was easy, she said. He thought we were friends. She said she'd gutted a hog once, then said she'd done worse. She said it like she was tasting spices, like it was a recipe. I don't know why I didn't pull over then. Maybe because you want to know if a person will call your bluff. Maybe because I'm stubborn. Maybe because I misread terror for a performance. She put the lid back on, wiped it with the sleeve of her dress, and set it between our seats, like it belonged to all of us. She said she'd done something to a man in Denver. She said it with a wryness that made my hairline prickle. She said she had the thing she'd taken from him in the Tupperware. Then she said something else that made a sound in my mouth like someone closes a lid on a coffin. He was real easy to make scream. Easy to... When people tell you things like that, you do a lot of math in your head. Did she mean it? Was it a threat? Was it storytelling to test the air? She watched me watching her, then reached under her seat and pulled out a little chrome pistol. Not a hunting rifle, something small, metallic and bright in the truck's dimness, its barrel catching the cab light. Her hands were calm. Too calm. She tapped it once on her palm like I was supposed to be impressed. Don't freak, she said. I ain't gonna shoot you, not unless you make me. But listen, if you get soft, you die easy. She smiled like she meant it as guidance. There's a part of a man that freezes at some point when facing danger. For me, it was a long, useless moment where I tried to recall every damn thing I ever learned in a safety video. Keep voice level. Don't make sudden moves. Keep the hands where they can be seen. I cleared my throat like a man who'd swallowed gravel and tried to ask her straightforwardly, "What do you want?" "Ride," she said, "and maybe somebody to listen. Or maybe I want to know what it's like to make someone believe they know you." She had a way of turning conversation into a blade. So I thought about the sleeper berth, the weight of the rest I'd been denying myself, and the daughter picture in the glove box with the crooked smile and missing tooth. I thought about my daughter and how I'd look if something happened to me, because I'd been trying to be a good Samaritan. Then she said something that sounded practiced and my mouth went dry. "You believe in ghosts?" she asked. "What?" I started. "You ever feel guilty about letting someone go?" She stared at me like she was trying to see the corner where guilt hides. "You ever think you should have stopped?" I felt like I'd been punched by a winter wind. I said 100 little lies, practical things about schedules and loads and the law. I told her I couldn't take her all the way, that I had to stick to my logbook, that I'd drop her at the next truck stop. She watched me write my lies into the air and listened, like each one was another coin to toss. Then she slid the pistol back into her bag, slow as if she were putting away a toothbrush. At the exchange at Kearney, she asked to be dropped at the Flying J. I told myself I was being reasonable. The lot was lit. People come and go there. Better to leave her where she'd be visible than keep her alone in a sleeper with me for the long haul. When I pulled into the lot, she didn't get out at first. She sat there looking at me, and I felt the truck become a judge's bench. I could have called it in. I could have driven to a state trooper. But cowardice and hope sometimes walk hand in hand. I didn't want to be the guy who cuffed a hitchhiker without evidence. I eased open the door. She stepped out like someone walking off a stage. When she hit the gravel, her bare feet didn't make a sound. Nobody else in the lot said anything. A man at the diesel pump glanced over, then went back to checking his oil. She went to the shadow under the highway overpass and melted into it. I sat with the heater on and the radio a low hum until my fingers stopped shaking. I reported her after I called dispatch from the truck stop payphone. Yeah, payphone. They still exist. Gave them a description, the time, where I'd picked her up, where I'd dropped her. The deputy on the other end said they'd file it. File it is a phrase with weight in it, like a ledger closing. They said they'd circulate the description. Later, the state trooper at the scale told me they'd had a similar report from a guy in a Ford, that a woman had been seen leaving a rest area and getting into the back of a van. Nothing concrete. "We'll keep an eye out," they said. Police talk like that sometimes, like the road is long and they're stretched across it with hands tied. Days later, I read about a missing person from Denver and about a man who had been found under circumstances that made the newsprint smell like rot. The article used words like alleged and investigators are looking into leads. It mentioned the victim was a man in his 30s. It mentioned a possible sighting of a woman matching Riley's description. It didn't tie together with my phone call. That's the way it goes. threads, not tapes. I learned to be precise with verbs. She said, she claimed, someone reported. You don't speak in certainties when the world made it clear that certainty can be a lie. The Tupperware haunted me for days. I kept seeing it on the passenger seat whenever I took that route. I felt sick at gas stations thinking of the way she wiped the lid with her dress, like cleaning a dish after a good meal. Later, on the CB, some of the other drivers told me they'd seen a girl hitchhiking around the same stretch. Always the same sundress, always the same grin. A couple of the older drivers rolled their eyes and called it a trick. That's what happens on the road. You get a story that changes 100 times into a ghost. After that night, I stopped picking up strangers, not out of bravado. It was just math. Loneliness has to be balanced against risk. I still remember the angle of her jaw and the spark in her eyes when she talked about Denver. I remember the way she called my daughter by asking if I was sure, and the way she looked at my hands like she wanted to map them. Someone else's life hung in my memory like a loose wire. It sits in me like a lesson and a permanently open file. Sometimes I worry that if I'd done something different, pulled over, called the troopers from the interstate shoulder, insisted on seeing ID, maybe things would have changed. But then again, maybe I would have been the one in the ditch and the story would have someone else's to tell. You carry both outcomes and neither. That's the rub of the road. You learn to live with doubt the way you learn to live with diesel smell. If you're into these, hit subscribe. I post more of this kind of stuff twice a week. The next one comes from a bright walkie-talkie day out on US 84, farther west than most folks travel, unless they haul lumber or guns. It was summer, sun high and mean, and the kind of heat that makes your skin feel like tin. I remember there was a load of palletized appliances in the trailer, shrink-wrapped and humming faintly like a sleeping animal. Seal still intact, seal number logged, stuff a younger me would have mentioned, and then relaxed about. 18 wheels and a load look like a promise, until somebody decides it isn't your promise anymore. I was running light, which is to say, I was on my way to pick up a heavier thing. The two-lane turned into a stretch where trees leaned over the roadway like men listening in. I spotted the Chevy in my mirror first. Black, low profile, windows dark as a midnight pool. It had red and blue LEDs in the grille that made my stomach drop. They were not the steady, bureaucratic flash of a state patrol. These lights pulsed and chattered like beacons for people who don't like rules. They pulled up alongside, matching my speed, like a hand putting itself on your shoulder. One of the men leaned out wearing a tactical vest and a badge that looked too new for the sun. They motioned for me to pull over. It was that split second again, stop or keep rolling. I did a quick check. No shoulder breakdowns ahead, clear lane. I eased into the pullout, engine still warm. When they knocked on my trailer door, there were 3 of them out front, 2 in ski masks and one who looked like he enjoyed the show. A 4th man stood a ways back, watching the highway like a lookout. The one with the badge flashed it with a smile so slick it almost slipped off his face. Just routine inspection, he said. His voice had that practiced authority they use on TV. He asked for my seals. I handed them over. Young me would have jotted the numbers in my logbook and relaxed. Older me knows not to be flattered by uniform. We're road people. We see uniforms all the time. Some are real, some are not. He asked me to pop the trailer, to open it so he could confirm manifests. I hesitated. He kept grinning, and that grin offset all the things that didn't add up. The way his vest had too many pockets, the way his boots were clean like he'd just walked out of a catalogue. Then somebody else in the group whistled, a long keening sound, and every man within earshot seemed to materialize from the trees. What started as 3 became a dozen. It's surprising how quickly a few extra bodies can change your world from a manageable incident to a deliberate containment. They had rifles as well as pistols. They had netting, gloves, packs with names ironed into them. I was ordered to kneel. They made me slide my hat off, unbuckle my belt, reach my hands behind my head. I remember gravel digging into my knees and the sun pressing down like a jury. The leader kept talking about patriotism and real Americans. He asked me if I knew who I was hauling for, what I stood for, if I had a conscience about the border. It had the flavor of a test, but the kind of test that comes with a muzzle. Men with that much certainty don't like shades of grey. They like pronouncements, they like people to identify themselves. They like the simplicity of being right and everyone else wrong. The main man rapped on a case of MREs and said, You drivers think you're neutral. Haul for the highest bidder, right? We're asking questions, we're reclaiming what's ours. I'd heard rumors about groups policing roads, about militias that set up their own checkpoints. You hear it, and you tell yourself it's far away until someone points a gun at your kneecaps. I didn't get a chance to argue theology. Their leader pulled pallets from the back of my trailer like he was unwrapping a present. My load, my contract, seen now like something to be seized. A man in the shadows asked me, You with us or against us? I told him I was with the job and what it required, getting to a dock on time, securing a signature, getting paid. He laughed like I'd made a joke. They took what they wanted. They took things that would matter to somebody who uses them to get by, things which had names that would make some papers one day and make most folks look the other way. When the leader asked me to kneel for identification, he had another man come up close and prod my chest. He smelled like ammonia and old coffee. Where you from? He said. Who's your company? Who pays your wages? I told them the truth. A small line haul company, a dispatcher in Dodge City, a boss who runs tight margins. He snorted like margins didn't mean anyone. You drive for the machine, he said. Machines deserve inspection. There was a moral arithmetic to everything they said, and it always added up in their favor. I noticed small things. A badge that wasn't federal, the wrong pattern on the camo, the way they used phrases that only make sense inside your head if you want to be violent. They photographed my licenses, my logbook, the seal numbers. One of them, young, maybe 20, kept glancing at me like he wanted to be older. There was a terrifying kind of theater to it all, like a bad production that didn't know how to leave the stage. I remember the whine of the engine, the rasp of gravel, the way my heart beat like somebody running a generator. I thought of my daughter again. You spend your life trying to keep other people out of harm, and then you sit at the shoulder with your hands behind your head while strangers pick apart the things you've been trusted with. It's humiliating and frightening, and it makes you small in a way you cannot unlearn. I wonder now often, what would have happened if I had shot my horn and run? Would they have chased me? Would they have fired to stop me? Or would they have let me go because it's easier to humiliate than to load a truck back up? The leader kept saying they were checking for contraband. They loaded things into their own trucks, pallets shoved into vans and pickups like they were stealing the fuel from a ship. I tried to tell the guy with the badge that my seal was intact, that the paperwork matched. He laughed a short, ugly sound and told me a story about a man who trusted paper and found the paper had teeth. They made me sign nothing. They made one of the younger ones ride with me for a mile to ensure compliance, and I drove with a man watching my every move from the passenger seat like he wanted to learn my routes, my habits, my weak spots. When they left my trailer lighter and my skin thinner. I called dispatch from the nearest payphone. Phone booths are the last bastion of privacy, and they said they'd file an incident and let the company know. My company's response was laughter, at least from my supervisor. You should have known better, he said, or something like that, like a joke and not a complaint. In their world, a missing pallet is a balance sheet. In mine, men with guns on the highway are the kind of memory that stays with you. I didn't call the sheriff that day. I didn't want to be the guy who raised a fuss and made other drivers targets. That's part of the trucker code. You don't make heat for yourself if you can help it. We keep our heads down, log our hours, and hope the road is long enough to throw the worst of it behind us. But sometimes the road brings it back around. I kept a picture in my wallet for a while of the black Chevy, tinted windows, LEDs that glowed like the eyes of a trap. Some months later, years in fact, I heard over a sleepy radio one morning that a group had been linked to armed robberies on highways across a stretch of states. The newscaster said the name of a suspected group and officers, suspected the gang targeted drivers they considered opponents to their cause. The cops later said they had probable ties to a group locals whispered about. The way the story landed, the law said suspected, and I said healed in my chest, like nothing had been healed. There's a slow justice on the road. Sometimes it arrives, sometimes it doesn't. We keep going anyway, though. You get up, do your pre-trip, swing the mirrors, check the seals. You watch the lanes and the shoulder, and you keep your hands near your radio. You learn to be polite and to be wary. That's how you last. That's how you don't make a story that ends on the shoulder. We were only 2 hours out of there when the sun got low and the world turned the color of old pennies. I was still thinking about the black Chevy when my phone buzzed with a text from dispatch. Delay in the yard. Hold for new instructions. That's industry lingo for stand by, and it meant I'd be spending more time on the stretch than I wanted. I scanned the horizon, nothing but the hum of the road and the slant of sun. Somewhere ahead the highway split, and somewhere beyond that the night would carry on, and with it the people who make the road their life. The sky darkened faster than I liked. A storm line began to set up on the weather app, the kind that brings sudden winds and the kind of rain that peels paint. I tightened the straps, checked the seals again, and kept rolling. There are nights when your whole job becomes a list of small, steady chores: mirrors, speed, logbook. Those chores keep you sane. They keep you alive. Ahead a billboard blinked an advertisement for a new steakhouse opening in a town that never had any business making steaks. It was ridiculous in the way only the road is ridiculous. Lights on cheap metal poles promising luxury where there is none. I thought about the people inside their homes, undoubtedly warm and safe, and wondered how many of them thought of us out there as invisible. We're like ghosts to most of the map, but we remember. We keep a ledger of faces and moments, the way a long life of driving becomes a catalogue of small savageries and little mercies. I suppose I could have planned to keep going, to avoid any lot, any exposed rest area. But sometimes the job betrays your plans. You get a dispatched call and you have to stop where they tell you, and sometimes the road throws you a curve that doesn't mean anything, and then it means everything. At the next shaded pullout I pulled in to check my straps again. That's when I noticed the fresh tire tracks in the gravel beside my rig. 2 new, the kind that would have been made in the last hour. They led away from my truck and into the trees, like someone had taken a long deliberate step toward nowhere. A small wrong thing in a long day. I got out, walked to the edge where the gravel met dirt, and followed the tracks with my eyes. They were heavy prints, boot treads, and they headed in the same direction my mind kept wanting to look. Toward a little rise where the radar tower casts a thin light. The hairs on my neck went up. You learn to notice things like tracks. They're a language. Someone was here, someone left in a hurry, someone walked like they had a purpose. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a man who had walked from run to run and would get into his truck and keep going. Or maybe it was the way danger likes to announce itself, a footfall at a time. I turned back to the cab, and that's when I saw the man standing by the tree line. Broad shoulders, cap low, a pack slung across his back. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He watched me like a person watching ants. I felt the thinness of the world then, the fragile skin of the life I was living, and how easily someone could put a thumb through it. He lifted his hand in a slow, casual wave. I didn't wave back. Not because I'm rude, because I'm careful. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that practices its angles in a mirror. He was alone, but the weight of the woods said otherwise. "You lost?" he called, his voice loud enough that the sound echoed off the tanker. "You should get moving if you're hauling. Cops don't like folks waiting." I said nothing. I told myself to call dispatch, to call the sheriff, to make noise. But in the back of my head I heard a memory of a man on the radio saying, "You pick your fights." And this one looked like a fight that would end with you missing a load and getting a bullet. I closed the cab door like it was the last diaphragm between me and the unknown. The man watched me pull away, then turned and melted with the trees. I kept driving because sometimes the only sane response is to keep your wheels rolling. But the image of the man at the tree line stayed in my peripheral vision, like a stain. I had a feeling then, an old trucker's sense of being watched, and I knew at some primitive level that the road had more stories to tell me that night. I tightened the straps again, checked the seals, and drove on into the coming dark. The highway, a thin artery bleeding light across the landscape. There are nights where the darkness doesn't scare me so much as the not knowing. You can survive a gun in your face if you can name it. It's the mystery that eats at you. It's the morning when you wake up and realize the world has rearranged itself while you slept. You get back in, you log your hours, and you keep driving. The road remembers. It shows you things if you're foolish or brave or both. I was only getting started that day. The storm line pushed east like a beast with a taste for warm air, and the highway, well, highways have a way of gathering trouble like magnets gather filings. I flipped the CB to channel 9 out of habit and got a load of static, and somewhere under it all, the faint hum of someone once proud of themselves. That hum, thin as a wire, preceded everything else. It sounds like a beginning. It sounds like an invitation. It sounds like a warning. That thin hum on the CB hung there, like a wire strung tight under a bridge. It was just static at first, a hiss, some truckers trading routings, but under it something else threaded through, a voice with more confidence than courtesy. I shifted channels, and the voice was gone like a fox through a hedge. I told myself I was being jumpy. I told myself a lot of things to calm my hands. They didn't leave me alone right away. One of the younger guys, maybe barely old enough to shave, climbed into my passenger seat after they'd rifled the trailer. He sat there like a parasite, learning a host. I drove with that kid beside me for half a mile, his eyes flicking to the mirrors as if memorizing each shard of the road. He asked me what routes I liked, where I usually took my breaks, how long I usually ran without stopping. He asked the questions of a man filing a map. I answered like a man doing paperwork in my head, soft and empty of color. I run east-west. I stop where the loads tell me. I keep a straight log. Those answers weren't lies, exactly, but they were a kind of suffocation. He got out at a little county road where the pavement crumbled away, and I watched him melt into the scrub. My hands were still a little numb from being told how to kneel. The thing that bothered me more than anything wasn't what they took, it was how casual it all felt. The leader tossed a swig of water to the young man like he was handing off a baton. They moved like a team that rehearsed moral outrage. It left a sour taste in my mouth. You spend your life trusting paperwork and manifests, and someone shows up with a mouthful of slogans, and suddenly your load and your life are negotiable. I called dispatch as soon as I could. The voice on the other end, calm, bored, jotted it down and said the right things. Incident report, insurance, maybe a follow-up. My supervisor? He acted like it was a mild inconvenience. That's industry for you. Losses get tallied and turned into margins. I remember what he said, laughed more than he sympathized, and I felt the old anger bloom. The company looks at stolen pallets and shrugs. We look at the men who took them, and we feel our world narrow. Weeks later, a scanner crackled in the early morning while I was still on a diesel hangover, and a small headline read across the feed. A string of highway robberies suspected to be coordinated by a group now under investigation. The anchor dangled the name, the Silent Brotherhood, and then hedged with police qualifiers. Suspected ties? Under investigation. The sheriff in the county where I'd been stopped said investigators thought the group set up pseudo-checkpoints to extort shipments. Suspected, the local paper said, which reads like an apology sometimes and alleged elsewhere. The FBI put out vague statements a year later, enough to let you breathe a little, but nothing neat. There's a particular kind of hollowness that sits with you after that kind of violation. It's not just the financial hit, it's the rearrangement of the road in your head. I started driving with my lights up in the mirrors, with CB on more than usual, watching taillights like eyes. You get tired of being a target. You add a habit or two, route changes, extra calls, a friend you call when you feel like someone's following you. Maybe that's paranoia. Maybe it's math. Either way, you keep the ledger of the night and fold it into the rest of your days. We live with the knowledge that the people you meet on the shoulder are not all good folk. The road gives and it takes. It hands you a sunrise above a valley and then hands you a truck full of missing freight. You tell yourself to be careful, and then you also tell yourself you can't live in fear. That balance, between being a decent human and being a wary one, is something we measure in small decisions. Who we pick up, who we ignore, when to call the law. Sometime after the black Chevy faded from the rear view for good, I found myself driving into Colorado when the sky went white. The mountains look different when they mean to keep you. The road narrows, and the world squeezes. It was December, one of those nights where the temperature gauge fussed in the negative and the chains chattered like old teeth. I was on a short turn, moving frozen goods between two depots, so my head was full of schedules and the little ritual tasks of a cold storage run. Check the trailer doors, ensure the seals are snug, tap the landing gear to see if it's set right, log the times. Snow is a different kind of danger than men with badges. It's patient. It comes for you by erasing everything you can see and making judgment calls feel like flips of a coin. That night, visibility dropped to a biscuit. The road was a narrow silver wire. My heater kicked on loud and steady, and the only lights cutting through the wall of white were my own. My wipers beat a slow, stubborn tempo. I'd had 2 cups of coffee and a bad sandwich, and I was tired in a way that anesthesia knows, the kind where your brain wants to go, but your hands resist. I saw the pink thing because it moved like an argument against the element, an impossible color against the landscape. At first it was only a flash, a smear against the white, then a small figure darting out from a drift and across the highway. The truck tells you the distance your feet don't. I slammed the brakes instinctively. The rig fishtailed. For a heartbeat, the trailer tried to overtake the cab, and I felt that cold, absolute terror where you understand physics and fate in a single gulp. Your world compresses into one decision, that split second when you either save what's in front of you or you don't. My rig slid. Tires squealed like dogs. I fought the wheel and the brakes and thought for a heartbeat. I was going to jackknife off the guardrail and tumble down into a place where recovery crews don't like to go. The cab vibrated with the jerking of 1,000 pounds of frozen freight. And then the blur was there in the road in front of me. So small I almost thought my eyes were playing tricks, wearing a pink coat, mittens that were wet and sagging. She, because she was just a child, came to a stop, eyes huge and black, and didn't cry. Kids on the road either scream or become statues. This one froze, like an animal that had learned it wasn't meant to be seen. I killed the engine because the louder we were, the more chance of bringing the mountain down on us. The heater hummed a tired consolation. I opened the door and stepped into a wind that cut through the lining of my jacket like it had knives on its teeth. She smelled of cold and snow and something fear-lens, an acrid tang like copper. Her face was red, cheeks pinched like someone had squeezed an apple. Her breathing was shallow, each gasp pulling at the edges of the pink hood. When I reached for her, she flinched but didn't run. She let me help her into the cab like she'd been waiting for an adult that knew what to do. I wrapped her in an extra blanket from the sleeper and held the heater toward her. Her teeth chattered. Her hands were a color I only ever see in pictures of frostbite. I poured some warm water into a thermos and blew on it until I wasn't sure whether I was warming the water or my own hands. She clung to the thermos like it was a life preserver. "You okay?" I asked, stupid question that it was. She looked at me like I'd asked if mercy was an option. She said, "He can run. He can fly." The words slurred out like they came from a dream, half clear, half memory. When you hear a child say he can fly on the side of a mountain at midnight, your brain does something strange. It halves between what you want to believe and what you know. I wanted to imagine an old man with a parka and a funny accent. I didn't want to imagine anyone who could run from a county line like it was a joke. "Who is he?" I asked. She blinked slow, like a camera trying to find focus. "He can run. He said he could catch me." She hugged her arms around herself as if holding her own warmth. There were no footprints except the tiny ones she'd made, no tracks leading toward a car, nothing but the silent black of the trees and the highway that looked like a seam cut through the world. I thought about calling the sheriff right there in the cab, using the CB to bark for help, but the phone signal was thin. It's the way mountains are. Their cell towers keep secrets. I drove to the nearest plowed lot, a county road turn with a single light and a sculpture of a cow that had seen better days. The sheriff's deputy who arrived was a man who'd been on the force long enough to have his hair turned white at the temples and his voice a little less confident than mine in what safe meant on a winter night. He took the girl into his care like a man who understands the language of small bodies. He wrapped her in a blanket and kept asking for her name. She kept answering in fragments. "Lila, maybe, pink coat." Names come out of shock, like loose change. The deputy handled it like anyone who works those roads. Calm, a little rough. Efficient in a way that hides how unmoored it makes you feel. They took her to the county clinic, and I sat in my rig with the heater on and my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The official word later was one of those careful things the sheriff's office puts in a release. Juvenile found hypothermic, no signs of foul play, investigation ongoing. That same sentence read like mercy and like a shrug. The deputy said on the radio that night that the girl had been found wandering near a rest area, that she was uninjured aside from the cold, and that her family had been notified. I believed the deputy because I wanted to believe him, and because who else would I trust in that little lit patch of road? Weeks passed and I kept thinking of the way she said, "He can run." Sometimes people in my line of work tell you stories that are the sort gymnasts. They flip and they dazzle, and then you stop believing because you've seen too many tricks. Maybe she'd been run off by a man with a truck and then found her way back. Maybe she'd been playing and lost her way. Maybe there was a man who can run, and he was always a little ahead of the law. Whatever the truth, the image of that tiny pink coat in the white dark stayed with me. It's the kind of thing that lodges in your knuckles. You find yourself thinking of it at stoplights, at home, at my daughter's kitchen table when she texts me a photo. You learn a humility when you save somebody or think you did. The ego likes to swell with the idea of heroism, but the road teaches you the opposite. Most of the time, you're a pair of hands that get someone from point A to point B. Once, on a late shift, I walked into the depot and told the dispatchers about the night. One of the guys said, "You did good, old man," with that half-teasing, half-honest tone we use to comfort each other. That simple approval meant more than any commendation. I still don't know the whole story about the pink coat. Some things on the road stay folded up. Not long after that was the debacle with Jerry. Jerry was the kind of man they put in the break room and forget to notice until his lunch tray disappears. Quiet, polite, never the first to speak at a preload huddle. He'd been with the company a while, an efficient driver in the cold chain, someone who knew the quickest route through city docks and who could thread a truck through an impossible lot. You'd notice he never had a family photo tacked to the dashboard, just a blank space where a picture might go. At first I thought that was private. Later I realized that absence alone was a kind of statement. I started seeing him in odd places, parked near a playground when he was supposed to be on a 10-minute break, easing his van by a school like he needed to count swings. A few of us made jokes at the shop, jokes that were unease in tuxedos. You joke about what you can't put a name to. When you make a joke about the weather, people laugh. When you joke about a trucker parked near a school, people shuffle. One afternoon I caught him straight up filming out of his van. The screen pointed at a group of kids on a sidewalk. He froze like he'd been caught sniffing in a cookie jar, then put his phone away and watched the children like someone watching a channel he'd found by accident. I didn't immediately confront him. Confrontations can go ugly, and there are ways the company likes to manage complaints that often involve paperwork and not much more. But I couldn't leave it alone either. You learn in a job like ours to trust those gut nudges. If something's off, it's off. I found him later at a coffee stand, where he was more awkward than usual. I asked him about the phone. He laughed and said he was checking traffic, that his camera was on accident. That laugh didn't sit right with me. I asked him to tell me the truth, and he made a face like he was annoyed at me for being a busybody. I told management what I'd seen. That's where the rot starts, in the place where procedure meets protection, where a company will close ranks if it means avoiding lawsuits or bad press. HR called me into their small beige office with the fake plant in the corner. "We take these matters seriously," the HR rep said, folding her hands like she meant the silence to be meaningful. "But we can't act on conjecture." They told me about policies and steps, and suggested I might have misread the situation, and that accusing a co-worker had consequences. Legal consequences if I made false claims, employment consequences if I kept at it. They were cold in the way paperwork is cold. I felt, for the first time in many shifts, like the system had folded over on itself and left me on the outside. I kept an eye on Jerry, because I'm not a man who can shrug off a feeling. I saw him park near the school again, and this time I called the sheriff. I didn't tell HR. I called because the sooner law enforcement knows, the less room there is for an HR memo to turn a predator into a problem somebody else will tidy up at the morning meeting. The sheriff's office said they had a man already watching online forums for someone matching Jerry's profile. That's how these things go now, an online trail leading to a physical one. Months later, When everyone had forgotten or pretended to forget, the affidavit came down like a court notice. Jerry had been arrested in an FBI sting, they said, alleged to have been attempting to engage a minor for sexual activity. The words, arrested in an FBI sting, are the kind of phrase that either shrinks you or straightens your spine. For me, it was both. I felt vindicated and hollow. Vindication is small comfort when the system almost turned its back on what little charity I offered. HR had almost warned me about being a troublemaker. I'd almost been the one framed as the problem. When the news broke in our little circuit, the faces around the break room changed. People who'd shrug and make jokes now gave me a crooked sort of respect. I quit that night, not because I got what I wanted, but because I couldn't keep working for a company that would have protected a predator with policy language. I gave my keys to a dispatcher who looked at me like I was making an overreaction. Maybe I was, but sometimes you cut off a piece of your life because you won't let it rot from inside. Later, I came back in on a different schedule. I wanted to see how it all landed. The paper said Jerry was arrested, and later charged, that careful word, and that investigations were ongoing. I walked past his old locker like a man passing a closed door. The shop had new coffee and the same smell of oil. The company sent out a vague email about protecting our community and about channels for reporting concerns. The letter read like a promise written in sand. I still think about the way HR handled it, the whispered warnings, the way they offered process before protection. I think about the officers who ultimately did the catching, about the online sting that brought him down, about the people who were brave enough to look long enough and report. There are no clean endings in our business, only shifts of attention and the slow turning of paperwork. You keep the lesson. Trust your gut, report. Don't let HR's discomfort be an excuse to ignore a kid's safety. After all that, I started telling myself stories to sleep. Some were about luck, some were about mistakes, some were about the fact that the road gives you more than freight. It gives you people whose lives you sometimes touch in unexpected, messy ways. That's the thing most people don't get about our line of work. It's not just roots and seals. It's people who get on and off the map in a heartbeat. Now the last one I'll tell you is short, and I need you to listen to how I say the word short, because it's the kind of thing that sticks like burrs. I want to be clear about one thing before I tell it. This next account is an expanded vignette, an inspired piece, drawn from years of road law, throwaway mentions, and my own early night hallucinations. It's labeled here for a reason. I'm not claiming to have the receipts on this as I claim for the others. Consider it road law, something that lives equal parts in truth and in the myths truckers tell each other to keep from going mad. Expanded from years of hearing roadside legends and a throwaway note from my early runs, The Vanishing Night Passenger. It was early in my career, maybe second year out, when you think you can sleep anywhere because your body is still an engine and your mind is still an optimistic map. I'd pulled into a rest area at 3 in the morning to get a nap. The highway hummed, and the moon was a thin coin in the sky. I slung off my boots and left the cab light dim. I dreamed for maybe 90 minutes, the kind of sleep where your body says okay, but your brain keeps a quiet eye open. When I woke, someone had been there. Her shape had warmed the passenger seat. The fabric was hot where a body had lain. There was a small wet smear on the seat, like a mitten left on a radiator or a damp footprint, and a faint smell of cigarette smoke, even though I didn't smoke. There was a hair tie looped around the sun visor, the cheap elastic you see on a woman who tucks her hair up in a hurry. The CB had a new line of dust where hands had rested. My first thought was logical. Someone had walked into my cab and slept. That happens sometimes. You shut the doors to a sleeper and people treat you like a hotel. I checked the lot. No car doors left open, no footprints other than mine. There was no sign of a person. The water bottle in my cup holder had been moved a hair's width. The small impossible clue was a tiny pink mitten tucked under the passenger seat, like a forgotten child's scrap of costume. I left it there, because who moves a mitten on a night like that? It felt like touching someone else's secret. I told my buddies about it later at a truck stop over eggs and bad coffee. They laughed like old men about vanishing hitchhiker tales and told me to blame the sandwich I'd eaten. Maybe I had nodded off and dreamed a person. Maybe I'd opened my eyes, readjusted, and the mitten had blown in through an open vent. all plausible, all unsatisfying. What haunted me wasn't the mitten. It was the feeling that I'd been part of a small narrative that the road sometimes writes when it wants to remind you it can bend the world. The story has variants. Sometimes the passenger sits in silence and vanishes when you look away. Sometimes they leave a token, a flower, a coin, a mitten, and sometimes they're a warning. In my version, whatever the truth, the result is the same. You drive on with an extra check in your head, your cab a little less like your private room and more like a stage where things happen. Road law survives because it has the right elements: isolation, night, and the human capacity to fear what it can't explain. I may never know if that mitten was proof of a ghost, a prank, or the universe's way of keeping you curious. But the fact I found it in the chair where a stranger had warmed itself tells you how close the ordinary and the uncanny live out there on asphalt. All of these stories, Riley with her Tupperware and her smile, the black Chevy and its fake authority, the pink coat in the snow, Jerry and his van, hang on a single wire in my chest. They are distinct episodes, but they sing the same refrain. The road is a place of extremes. It hands you salvation and menace in the same hour. It gives you a sunrise and then a reason to lock the sleeper. It puts your hand on the smallness of your life and dares you to keep driving. If there's a lesson that threads through these 5 nights, it's this: keep your eyes open, but don't become a hermit. Be generous, but not at the cost of your safety. Report what you see, even if HR shrugs. Trust the little voice that tells you something's wrong and then back it up with action. That doesn't make you brave. It makes you practical. The road doesn't reward saints so much as it rewards people who can survive and help when they can. People ask me sometimes if I sleep better after telling a story. Not really. Stories don't unmake nights, but they let you catalogue them, give them shape so you can carry them without being crushed. You tell the tale, and something loosens, like a knot finally untangled enough to breathe. Before I sign off, one thing practical. If you've got a story from the highway, something that unsettled you or saved you, send it in. I read every email. I put a lot of the submissions up for members who help keep the channel going. If you want early access to episodes and a place to tell your tale among folks who understand what an empty shoulder feels like, join the membership or Patreon. You'll hear more of these, and better yet, you'll help other drivers tell their truths. Keep your rigs tight, your mirrors clean, and your CB on when you feel alone. The road remembers. Sometimes it forgives. Sometimes it keeps its own counsel. Either way, if you're out there, and I know many of you are, don't let your guard down too fast. Be kind when you can, be sharp when you must, and keep the rubber side down. This is an old hand at the wheel signing off. Keep the lights on and the heater humming. See you on the next stretch.